I started my work on population control. There is a big mess and population control program in Bangladesh. And it's totally connected with global politics and mostly regulated by donor agencies. Even when I was conducting my undergrad thesis fieldwork, I saw that Norplant, which also was implanted on 600 women bodies in our country. And I selected 32 Norplant users and 5 health professionals. Some researchers were arguing that it's a good contraceptive for Bangladeshi poor women because they often forget to have their contraceptive daily basis. If population controllers implant these for a long time, it will help for them to plan their family. But on the other side, many feminists who worked on that issue, they were arguing, no, they're abusing women's bodies, and women, after implanting this issue, women were facing so trouble, and they went to the hospitals, and health professionals didn't hear them and didn't give them treatment. But when they went to remove this contraceptive, they most of them were first time refused to remove it, and some of them went to hospital to remove it again. Some actually were hopeless and didn't go there, and they tolerated their pain with this implant, and it was not a good experience for the poor women. So my conclusion was actually it's not their reproductive freedom, and it's not beneficial for them.
My mom was a single mom, and she had my oldest sister when she was a teenager. I think that I understood from a very young age that society thought this was wrong. Even though she was making sure that we had a great education, my mom eventually, she completed college. But I still understood that, like, our family was different because there wasn't, there wasn't two parents. We didn't live in a big house, and my mom was also very politically active, and so she would take us to protests when we were young. We have a picture of us at an anti-apartheid rally, and we're too young to really know what it was, but those issues, just issues of social justice or concern about the world, have been a part of the family. For Martin Luther King Day, she might have put together a talk about activism among African Americans, and she would, make us go. Sometimes we didn't want to go, but it just becomes part of how you kind of look at the world. I went to undergraduate, and I actually was studying to be something very practical. I was studying to be a dietitian. I switched my major to gender and women's studies. I was going to graduate school to study activism, and I wanted, more depth around it, and I happened to be on a project on global feminisms that it's a public project and based at University of Michigan, and they were doing interviews in India, China, Poland, and the U.S. with feminist activists, and each site had authority over its own interviews. I was helping research Loretta Ross. She was being brought in to do an interview, and then my advisor who was running the project said, "Why don't you do the interview?" And I said, "Okay." And I didn't know formally about the reproductive justice movement, but once I learned about the reproductive justice movement in the U.S., I said, oh, this all comes together. The idea that it's important, yes, to talk about the right to not have children and the right to have access to contraception and abortion, but also the right to have children and to not have a contraception forced on you or to not be forcibly sterilized, and also the right to parent your children, whether that be someone who had a child as a teenager, having the support that they need, or be someone who's incarcerated, and those are experiences that different people in my family had, and so that it wasn't something just off distant academic. It was part of
your life.
Part of life, yeah. And so this framework and learning more about the history of the movement from one of the founders of the movement, who's very compelling. They're all connected in people's real lives, and that's how movements also need to operate.
Nowadays, dual positions are there. On the one side, population control program, governments aim to control population. On the other side, due to the market interest, private clinics and doctors are promoting assisted reproductive technology, and they are reiterating the importance of motherhood in women's life, and they are reconstructing the stigma of infertility, so that women who are infertile, they go to the doctor and have assisted reproductive technologies. From the history, we have seen that pharmaceutical companies and donor agencies, they are using this issue to promoting the market though. So doctors are using the statement mothering is a reproductive justice to encourage assisted reproductive technology, and in many cases we are also failures. So we should actually locate the gap and why in some ways we became failures.
Many people agree, and you say, hey, do you think that, do you want to be able to decide when you have children? Most people say yes. Do you want to, if you have children, do you want them to be safe? Yeah, like people can get on board with that they understand. And you say, okay, well, what has to happen for not just you, but other people in the neighborhood you don't know? Like, what does that have to happen? And that's where you get to like, oh, it's a much broader shift that has to happen. How, as reproductive justice becomes a topic that people, academics, particularly in the US, are very interested in studying, what are the challenges of that? And what would it look like to have more collaborative relationships in studying reproductive justice and ethical relationships? Because using that to say, what does it mean to help a next generation become reproductive justice scholars with all the limitations and constraints of academic work and the accountability to social movements? How do you mesh those? And that's something that particularly I think continuing generations are going to be struggling with. So that's also part of what issues I take on as more and more people become interested in reproductive justice.
So media may be one place to share alternative thinking. We should think in other ways indirectly how we can convey our alternative thinking to them. The more we connect people, so more we will be actually successful.
It was exciting to be at this convening because I do feel like many people knew one or two people that were part of it. I think it was both a great reinforcement for many of us, but also pushing us in different ways to think about, how is this connected to what's, going on in Bangladesh? How is what's going on with rhinoceros poaching?
Yes.
How is that relevant to the issues that people are facing in the criminal justice system here, right? And on the surface, it doesn't look connected for many people, right?
Yes.
But part of the challenge is that actually it is, but how do you talk about those connections? But it's also different to talk with someone when they talk about the stories in which they're hearing from people in their community, or when you're telling me about how the positive response from young girls when you're talking with them about these issues, but also the emotional impact, and that's something, we can't just get that by reading. And supporting each other, I think, is also another way to push the convention, is to say, oh, this issue is connected, even though people are working on this campaign over here, it is connected to what we're doing over here. And even just those ideas, I think some people are like, oh, that's enough to help them shift a little bit. You have to constantly push against conventional wisdom in order to shift it. In your context, have you seen creative ways people have used media to challenge injustice that you think might be something that we need to look at moving forward?
I'm from Bangladesh. 80% people are there are poor, and many of them don't have internet access, even don't have food security. So it will be tough to use only media to reach them. So we should, media is a very important medium to convey our alternative thinking to the people, but we should also look other ways. I can say I delivered 2 lectures at a root level where around 50 to 70 different kind of girls were invited. I showed my story to them, and I brought some issues so that they can think that women can do and women can think alternatively, because in my country women mostly think, oh, marriage is our destination, motherhood is our destination, so they are eager to say their stories. So I think listening is very important thing to build solidarity, to build sisterhood.